Hello guys, if you're watching this video is pre-recorded because I'm on Christmas break, so I will announce the new patrons next week in the next video. But a large shout out to Halo Burner for their continued support of the channel this month on Patreon. I hope you enjoy the video, my friend. Alright guys, today we are going to make it so we can save more complex data types. And by that I mean we're going to save things like, for example, a weapon with an Ash of War. Because right now you can see we can get the weapon by using the weapons identification and then using the world item database to get that item. But what happens if you want to get the item with some more data? Like, for example, you could save the Ash of War on it. You can save the upgrade level of the weapon. If you're making an ARPG, you can save special effects or the item's name. So what happens when we want to save more than just the weapon? So you can see the Ash of War has an ID itself. So we're basically going to use that. But first we're going to go to our scripts in our game saving folder, and we're going to make a serializable weapon script. It's going to be very similar to serializable dictionary. Basically, we're going to make a thing here that we can save a bunch of data to, and then we can just get the weapon using this. So I'm going to delete the start and update functionality and put in my namespace as is per tradition. I'm going to use the system.serializable header here, like so. And I'm going to make this derive from, check the notes here, it's called iSerialization callback receiver. So it's going to throw you an error. You have to implement on, before, and after serialization. So you can right click here and do quick factorings, and then you can just do implement interface, and there you go. It'll give you two of these functions. So one's called before and one's called after, as it suggests. We're not going to use these because we don't need them, but they are handy for anybody who wants to use them. But we're going to keep it very simple. All we're going to require for this right now is two variables. So first one, serializable field, public int. It's going to be the item ID. And the same thing for the second one, but we're going to have the Ash of War ID. So basically, you can use this and still use basic variable types like int, string, etc. And we can put more information on this and then kind of serialize it all together. So you could add, for example, your upgrade level. And in Nephilim I use enums, but you can get an enum using an int. And then from there you can store the upgrade level, and then when you equip the weapon it will determine the damage, etc. But for now, to keep it very simple, all we have is the item ID and the Ash of War. So we're going to put two of those in there. Now we can make a public weapon item. This will be a get method. We can call this get weapon. Now what's this going to do? Well, we're going to make a local weapon item variable, call it weapon, and we're going to say this is equal to world item database dot instance, and then we're going to make a function we don't have yet. So I'm going to call it get weapon from serialized data, and then I'm going to pass this because we're going to make it require a serialized weapon. Then I'm going to simply say return weapon. So let's copy the name of this function that does not exist, and then let's go over to the world item database and let's go ahead and get that. So open this up, go right down, and we're going to come right down to the bottom. I'm actually going to make a comment here to separate these. So this is the item database, and then we can use the serialization methods, or we'll call this item serialization. So again, this is just basically getting stuff from saving and loading. So public serializable weapon, whoops, that's actually supposed to be a public weapon item. It's supposed to pass a serializable weapon to get this, so I'll fix that in a sec. So this is going to be public weapon item, get weapon from serialized data. So as this suggests, it's going to pass serialized data, and then from that, we're going to turn it into a weapon. So when you're loading the game, you're going to use this. You're going to pass some serializable data. You're going to turn that back into a weapon. And we also need to do the reverse where you turn a weapon into serializable data. So weapon item, weapon is equal to, and then we're going to get the weapon first by its ID from our world item database. We use our get weapon by ID function, and we pass the serialized weapon.item ID. And we're going to say if the weapon is null, we're going to return the unarmed weapon, because remember, your weapon should never be null. You should always have a weapon, and the unarmed weapon is our default weapon. So just to be safe too, I'm also going to instantiate a copy of that, so it's not modifying the original in any way. And then I'm going to say weapon.ash of war action. Now we should probably check first to see if this is null. It shouldn't be, because you should have a no action ash of war by default. That's why I do a Nephilim, or you can keep it null if you want, but it's a good practice just to have an Ash of War that does nothing, just put on all your weapons by default. But just in case you have nothing, we're going to make it fail-proof. So we're going to say if the Ash of War exists by its ID, we're going to search it. And then we're going to say Ash of War variable Ash of War is equal to, and we're going to instantiate a copy of that one, or you might not need to instantiate it depending on your project, because if you're just getting and reading animation data, then you're fine. But if you're editing the scriptable object in any way, make sure you instantiate it. It's very important. Next, we're going to say weapon.ashOfWarAction is equal to ash_of_war. And that's it. And then we're going to simply return the weapon. I am going to instantiate this ash_of_war just in case. I think in this project we're never going to edit it at all, but I'm just going to just because it's good practice. So down here we can return the weapon. There we go. Now we save that, and now we can use this to get our weapon. So that's great. Now we have a way to pull the weapon from serialized data, but now we need a way to save the weapon to serialized data. So before we do that first, let's go to our character save data, and right here you can see we have a public int for right weapon 01, 02, 03, left weapon 01, 02, 03. Replace these with serializable weapon. And this is actually going to make the code look a lot cleaner too in the save and load functionality, and I'll show you why momentarily. Basically, we don't have to check for null references in the code anymore down there because we can do that within these methods to get the weapon, and it just makes it look a lot nicer. But I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a moment. So for now, let's go to the world save game manager, and let's make a function now to actually do the reverse. So here we got get weapon from serializable data. Now we need to get serializable data from a weapon, or rather turn a weapon into serializable data. So this is when you're saving it, basically, when you save the game. Want to turn it into that basic information. So we got public serializable weapon. We're going to say get serializable weapon from, we could say weapon item, or just from item, whatever you prefer. I'm going to make it very clear. So I'm going to say weapon item, and we're going to make this require a weapon item. Okay, so we just do the reverse, basically. We say serializable weapon, this is a variable type, is equal to, we just make a new one. So we could say is equal to new serializable weapon. And then we're going to say serializable weapon.itemID is equal to weapon.itemID. And then we're going to say if the weapon has an ash_of_war. So if the ash_of_war does not equal null, we're going to pass that value by getting the ash_of_war's item ID. Oh, sorry, this should be if the weapon's ash_of_war does not equal null, not the serializable weapon. The serializable weapon is what we're making here. So if the weapon.ash_of_war_action is not equal null, then we're going to say the serialized weapon.ash_of_war_id is equal to the weapon.ash_of_war_action.itemID. Otherwise, we can just set it to -1. Now, I'm doing this again because -1 will never return a valid object in any of our item databases. So basically, it's just the same as saying null. I don't want to use 0 because 0 could be a valid item ID. This is why, though, you should use an empty ash_of_war, or you can call it no skill or no ash_of_war that just does nothing. You can have that as item ID 0 if you'd like. But I'm just going to write it out as it is in Nephilim. Both approaches are valid. You just may prefer one over the other, so do whatever one makes most sense to you. I'm just going to say serialized weapon.ash_of_war equals -1. Now I'm thinking about it, I'm actually have a no weapon ash_of_war Nephilim. I can't remember, to be completely honest with you. So there should always be an ash_of_war by default if you want to go about it the other way, though, and make an empty one. If not, then this failsafe will work as well. We'll say -1. Then we're just going to simply return the serialized weapon. All right, cool. We have both the getting the weapon and turning it into data. Now what do we do? So first is on save data. So now we're going to say current character data dot write weapon 01 is equal to world save game manager dot instance dot get serializable weapon from weapon item, and we pass the weapon in our inventory like so, just like that. So we just erase the ID and we just pass the weapon itself. So basically nothing here changes except you're now using this function from the world save manager. You're still getting it from the same place. Instead of passing the ID now, you're passing the whole weapon. All right, just going to correct these now as well, and I'm going to drop in the get serializable weapon and erase the ID, so we're just passing the weapon only. That looks good. Now we got to go down to reload the weapon, and we're going to get it a little bit of a different way as well. It will be a bit cleaner too, and I'll show you why. So you can see here we're checking our inventory, and then we're basically saying if the weapon exists. Sorry, we're checking the list to see if it exists, and then we're assigning it. Otherwise, we're going to set it to null. But there's an easier way we can do this. It's just one simple line now. It's player inventory dot weapons in whatever slot is equal to current character data dot whatever slot dot get weapon. That's it. So basically these multiple lines of code now becomes just a single line of code. And the reason why we can do this is because if we actually follow the function here, so let's go to the definition, you can see, yeah, we're getting the weapon. Okay, cool. And I get the weapon from here. If the weapon is null, it just returns us the unarmed weapon. So it's never actually going to be null. We don't need to do a null check and then assign unarmed. It just does it for us there. It just looks a lot neater. So that's great. So again, erase these multiple lines, and all of this just becomes a few lines now. Do the same thing for the right and the left weapons. And make sure you're setting your slots 0, 1, and 2 is right weapon 1, 2, and 3. So I'm just going to check this real slow to make sure I'm not erasing anything that's important here. And then I am going to do the same thing with the left weapons. So I'm looking at this right now. I don't think we actually ever saved our index. I know we have the code for it. I can see the right weapon index down there, but I don't see the left weapon index. So I'm going to put that here in just a moment as well. So I'm going to copy where I saved, or rather loaded, the right weapons. I'm going to replace the keywords right with left, and we'll do the same thing here now and grab the left weapons. Okay, left weapon slot O, left weapon slot O is equal to 1, 1 is equal to 2, and then 2 is equal to 3. All right, cool. So I'm just going to take this here now. This is where we're checking for the index and move it up here so it's closer to the weapons. And now, if I go over here, I'm going to make sure I instantiate the weapon over when we get the weapon. That's a big mistake, and I've not done that, so make sure you do that. That's very important. Instantiate the weapon. Make a copy of it. Don't take the weapon directly because you're going to be changing stuff on the weapon because, as you know, we're going to be changing the Ash of War. So we're going to say the weapon is equal to null by default, and then we're going to check the list to make sure there is a weapon in the database with that appropriate ID by saying if get weapon by ID, pass the item ID from the serialized weapon. So if that does exist, then cool, we're going to say weapon is equal to, and then we're going to get it from the list like so. And that's it. Very simple, very straightforward. Let's save that. And now let's go back to the project and go to the player network manager because we have to change something. Now, normally we're changing the item ID and that changes the weapon for us. You can see here on current right hand weapon changed. This is bad though because we don't want to instantiate a new weapon. We only want to do that if we're loading this on someone else's screen for our player model because we need the data on the weapon that we already have, much like our Ash of War or our upgrade level in the future. But on the other end, they don't need to know that. They just need to know what the weapon looks like so we can get the weapon from the database because it's always going to look the same. So we're going to put that if we're not the owner, we're going to instantiate the weapon. And if we are the owner, we're going to do something different. So make sure we do this for the left weapon as well. So again, just to be clear, we don't want to reinstantiate the weapon because that would get us a brand new copy of the weapon scriptable object. We want to keep the one we're loading when we load our game so we have stuff on it like Ash of War and item upgrade level. But if you're seeing my player from your point of view, you don't need to know my Ash of War or my upgrade level. You just need to see the copy of the weapon. So let's go back to the player equipment manager 2 where we switch our left and right weapons. Let's do the same thing. As you can see here, we need to keep this where we're switching the value, but right above where you're switching your left or right hand weapon value, just make sure you say your current left hand weapon is equal to the selected weapon. That's it. And do the same thing on the right hand. So basically above, because we have to do this above because when we switch the current right or left hand weapon ID, it's going to call load new weapon from that function. Now, if you want to, you can just actually go into that function itself where we have on right and left weapon switch, which I'm just thinking of now. And then you could actually assign the weapon there if you are the owner. And you could get the weapon by getting your current left hand or right hand weapon using your index. That's perfectly acceptable too. I'm just going to do it this way because I've already got it set up like this. But it might be better to do that if you don't want to write it out here multiple times. It will be a bit more condensed. But I'm just going to keep on and do it this way for now. So we're going to do the same thing with the right hand weapon. Wherever you see us setting that right hand weapon ID, just right before you do that, make sure you set your current right hand weapon to the selected weapon. Now, like I said, just to be clear one last time, we're doing this because we're not actually instantiating a new weapon for us as the owner. We're using the weapon we actually have already, which we pulled from our load or save data. So we keep the important information on it and don't instantiate a new scriptable. So back over on the player manager, where we're getting the weapon to now, we're also going to set the index by saying right hand weapon index is equal to current character data.right weapon index. We're going to do the same thing for the left weapon index as well. So player inventory manager left hand weapon index is equal to the current character data.left weapon index. Cool, looks good. Now, down here, we can do the same thing one last time. We can simply assign the current right hand and left hand weapon to the weapon specifically in the slot. So for us, that's going to be player inventory manager, and then it's going to be weapons and left hand slots, current character data.left weapon index. And then we can do the same thing with the right handed weapon, and that's it. So I'm just going to paste this right down here like so. Good to go. Then we can change left to right and then left to right. So again, if you want to, you can put this in the on right and left weapon switched. Just make a case for if you are the owner, compare it with the right and left weapon index and switch it that way. Now, if I go into the game, you can see here I do have a shield equipped. I'm going to click on it. And if I click on the shield, you can see I'm going to go down. There is nothing in the Ash of War. Now I'm going to put parry, which is the only Ash of War we have. I'm going to go to the save game manager here, and I'm going to save the game. You can see it did save. I'm going to close out. I'm going to jump back in, load the game. And when I pop back in, there's the shield in my hand. And now if I go down to the player and I click on the shield and I go down to the Ash of War, there it is, parry Ash of War. So working as intended. You can do the same thing now with weapon upgrades or whatever else you want. You can even save special names to the weapon, or you could save damage types if you wanted to do it that way. But to do one more now on video, we have time, we can do the serializable range projectiles. So we're going to learn how to do the same thing, and you should pause the video right now and give it a try. We're going to make it so we can save the item count of the projectiles. So pause the video right now. You saw me do one with weapons. Do the same thing now for the range projectile items. I will wait. Okay, we're going to delete the start and update functionality as is per tradition, drop in the namespace, and then we're going to copy basically everything here from the serializable weapon. We're going to basically make this system.serializable, copy the item ID and the Ash of War. We're not going to use the Ash of War though. We'll change that to the current projectiles remaining. So paste item ID and then the item amount, which would be the arrows or bolts if you're using a crossbow. So we need to make new getter functions. Instead of get weapon, this will become get projectile or get range projectile item, whatever you want to call it. And then instead of getting a weapon item variable, we're going to use a ranged projectile item variable. This will be called projectile or ranged projectile, whichever you prefer. We're going to get this from the world item database. Let's change get weapon from serialized data to get ranged projectile from serialized data. And let's go make that real fast. So over here on the world item database, we can copy what we already have, paste it right below. Weapon item again becomes range projectile item. And then we can say get range projectile from serialized data. And we can say serialized range projectile. And we can say serializable projectile. This is pretty close to how I'm doing it in Nephilim. I just have a few more variables, but for the most part, it's almost identical. So we're going to say get projectile instead of get weapon ID. And again, same series of hoops. Make sure you instantiate it. You don't want to edit the script rule because especially in this one, we're going to be changing the item amount every time. So make sure you are instantiating a copy. Whatever is a weapon item becomes a range projectile item. Wherever you see the name weapon, change it to range projectile. Instead of searching your weapon item database, search your range projectile database. There is no Ash of War, so delete this. But instead, we are going to be getting the current item amount. We can set that by saying range projectile dot current amount remaining equals serialized projectile dot item amount. All right, cool. Save looks good. So now let's go over to the the world save game manager and do the reverse. So we're going to get a serializable range projectile from the projectile item. So again, copy what you got for the serializable weapon and just do it in reverse. Do the same thing. Change weapon to range projectile and erase your Ash of War and check for the current amount that you have left. So as it stands now, there is quick slot items in our game. There's range projectiles and there's weapons. Those are the only things that really need these, I'll call them serializations. These serialization scripts rather, because they have, more than one little set of data. Anything that's like a key or like a, a standalone item you can just get from the item database using the item ID, like spells. You don't need to make this kind of thing for spells unless you want to, but there's really no purpose to do it because you can just use the basic item ID. So again, item amount is equal to projectile occurrence ammo amount, save. And now let's implement this in our character save data. So let's add it. I don't think we actually saved projectiles last time. They're pretty new. So let's make a public serializable range projectile, main projectile, and public serializable range projectile, secondary projectile. Main and secondary. All right, cool. Let's jump back over to the player manager and we're going to just jump somewhere. I think I've gone too far. I've gone much too far. All right, down here on saving, I'm going to put it right under the weapons and right above checking for our spell. So we're going to say if player, actually we don't need to do a null check here. I'm pretty sure. Let me check my notes on Nephilim just to make sure. I don't think we need a null check because we can set it up so we don't need to. Yes, okay, we can set up so we don't need a null check. So current character data dot main projectile is equal to world save game manager dot instance dot get serializable range projectile from range projectile item, and we pass our main projectile. Now, if it's null, come back here to the function get serializable range projectile from projectile item. We're going to say if the projectile is null, we're not going to return actually. we're going to open up some brackets. So we're going to say if projectile does not equal null, do this, and we're going to pass our normal code. And if it is null, just return the null projectile. So let's say serialized projectile.id is equal to -1. All right, save. Now do the same thing for the secondary projectile. So secondary projectile is equal to world save game manager.instance.very long function name, and we pass our secondary projectile, which is in our player inventory. And now we do the load method. So I'm going to come down to where we have our weapons again. I can see I'm going to delete this. There was the right weapon index. We did have it here, but I moved it up. So I'm going to delete the old one. And I'm going to call player equipment manager.load main projectile equipment. And now we can pass the current character data.main projectile.get projectile. And that's it. It's just that simple. All right, do the same thing for the secondary projectile. It looks a lot neater in the save and load function now with these methods. So load secondary projectile equipment. Pass your secondary projectile.get projectile. Okay, save. Now go back over to get range projectile from serialization and open up some brackets here. So if the projectile is in the list and is not null, then we're going to get the item ID, instantiate it, and get the amount. Otherwise, it's null, return null. So I'm going to put a bow in my hand here. I'm going to put a standard arrow set in my main arrows. And you can see I have 229 of these right now. So I'm going to equip the bow before I save the game. I'm going to two-hand it. I'm just going to shoot one actually real fast. So 229, 228. Yeah, working cool. All right, now I will save. So go to my world save game manager and save. And now if I close out the game and close back in or log back in real fast, we'll see. Okay, I'm in. Now I should have 227 after I fire this arrow. So fire this arrow and 227, yes. I forgot the UI was down there in the bottom. But yeah, there you go, guys. You have a method to save and load more than just basic values. You can do this, and you can add a bunch of variables to a single item. You can save a lot of complex stuff this way. So I briefly mentioned this in the Discord in the announcements, but I kind of had a little roadmap of where we're going to go next. Now, in the next video, I am first going to finish saving all the other things we have made, like Sites of Grace unlocked. We can do consumable objects. We can do like every item in our inventory. However, if after watching this video you feel confident to go do it yourself, you should definitely go do that. It is a great way to get some experience. So if you do know how to do that, you can skip the next video if you'd like, or you can watch it just to see how I did it. But I am going to finish saving the rest of the values, the rest of the data we have in the game so we can make it so basically every item we have in our inventory when we sign off and sign back in will still be there. Everything we have unlocked, such as Sites of Grace, that'll all be good. But the roadmap, after that, my plan was as follows. A few people have been asking about a character creation menu and a class selection menu, so I'm going to do that. And then from there, I thought we could maybe do a mock-up level, and I could show you some level design techniques as well as optimization techniques for medium to large size levels. And then we can have a little gauntlet to run out all the mechanics we've made. And from there, we can keep expanding on stuff. But it will be nice to have our character in a place that isn't just a test room. So having an actual level would be a great place to actually test things more thoroughly. If you have any objections to that and you'd like to see something before I move on to those subjects, please comment below and let me know. As always, thank you very much for joining me. This was pre-recorded before Christmas break. So as you're watching this now, I hope you had a very nice holidays if you celebrated. And I hope you all have a very lovely weekend. A special thank you to my patrons. It is because of you this series is still alive. You have my genuine gratitude and appreciation. That's it for me. I will see you guys next week.